Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as we cut back my bleeding heart. So let's go. This is the old-fashioned bleeding heart, and it looked so pretty in the early spring months. It put on a lot of color, and then I even collected the seeds from it. I made a video showing you the process for collecting the seeds, and then I let it just basically put all its energy into feeding the roots for next year. But you can see that it's turning a yellow color, and it basically is going dormant. Where you live, you might have noticed that the plant basically looked like it died or it died back. That's natural. Bleeding hearts typically do that. I have drip irrigation in this bed, so this plant has been very happy. It's been getting a lot of water, so it stayed green for a long time. But today is the day. I want to cut it back because honestly, I can't get in here and weed. Plus, I intend to divide this plant later this season. It's been a number of years since I divided a bleeding heart. And what I'm planning to do is divide some of my bleeding heart this fall and then divide some of my bleeding heart next spring. And I'll be making a video later this season showing you my process for dividing the bleeding heart. But come in closer and I'm going to just show you what I'm doing in terms of cutting back my bleeding heart. I'm just using small hand pruners to do the job, but you can use whatever cutting tools that you have handy. The key is to make sure you're safe because they're sharp and also make sure that they've been sanitized. You could come in and cut this all the way down to the base, but I'm actually going to come in and just cut it a few inches above soil level because I want to be able to see this plant in the fall when I come in to divide it. This process is actually very simple, very easy, but the reason I wanted to make this video was I think a lot of people get worried when they first buy a bleeding heart that their bleeding heart is dying. And I wanted to stress the importance of knowing that it's not dying, it's most likely just going dormant. I love this plant, and what I did was I sprinkled a lot of its seeds at the base of this area, so I'm hoping for a lot of free plants next year. This bleeding heart has gotten huge over the last few years, and I would say if I had to guess, it's at least 6 or 7 years old, so it definitely needs to be divided. When I was doing my research on when is the best time to divide bleeding heart, I found that in the warmer climates, you want to divide it in the fall, whereas in the cooler climates, you want to divide it in the spring. I live in zone 5B, so I'm definitely considered a cooler climate. However, I also worry a little bit about dividing a plant like this in the springtime because it blooms in the spring, which is why I'm going to do an experiment, and I'm going to divide some pieces of it in the fall and some pieces of it in the spring. After doing some research on this topic of dividing, what I noticed was that when you do make your divisions, you just have to be careful. The big thing to keep in mind when it comes to dividing your bleeding heart is you just want to make sure that you're very gentle with the roots because they are very fragile, very tender. You also want to make sure that each division that you make has at least one good eye on it. And typically those eyes will appear in the late summer, early fall. When I originally placed this bleeding heart in this flower bed, it was very small, and it's definitely gotten huge over time, which means it's happy where it is. However, it's towards the front of a flower bed, and I think I would prefer to have it a little bit towards the back of the flower bed, just because now I know how big this plant can get. This bleeding heart has a very pretty pink and white flower to it. In my yard, I also have a bleeding heart that has a red color flower. And then I have the native bleeding heart, which is also beautiful. And that's a fringed bleeding heart. When it comes to ideas of what I can do in this space, now that I've opened it up, one idea is I can put together a very pretty pot with flowers in it and put it in this area just to add some color. And with all these pieces that we're cutting, these can just go right into my compost pile. Just make sure if you're going to add them to your compost pile that they're free of any disease. I used to think that bleeding hearts were just a small little perennial, but if they're happy like this one is, they actually tend to be pretty big and almost like a little shrub or a bush. Just to give you an idea of this space, it was actually quite a large bleeding heart. And I'm so glad that we got it cut back because it makes the area just look neater, tidier. And the great news is while I was cutting this bleeding heart back, I noticed a ton of baby little seedlings all around of the bleeding heart. Last year, I made a conscious effort to take those seeds and I scattered them through this area. And now I have a ton of small plants that I can dig up very carefully without disturbing the roots and move them to other parts of my yard. Another great thing about cutting back this bleeding heart is now I can come in here and weed the area behind me that really needs to be weeded. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. I'll be sure to add any videos that I have regarding the bleeding heart down in the description area. And be on the lookout for future videos when I show you my process for dividing bleeding heart. And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.